Hi, Gaynor. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you. I always, as you know, resort to you as my pessary guru, and I'm really excited to have a chat with you today. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Kim. And I love to sort of follow you everywhere as well. Not stalk you, but that's a bit weird. But I just
I
love
think we all
this.
stalk one another, really,
But it's an
in this.
absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to start out just at the start. So introducing how you became, you call yourself the pelvic angel. You really are the pelvic guru, the pessary guru. And how did that happen? How did that come to be?
Well, it started over 25 years ago. My mother had urinary stress incontinence and she went to the doctor. She was now, bearing in mind that my mother had been a nurse, from the age dot. So all that time, she had never been offered a pessary, didn't even know what a pessary was. In all fairness, she was working on the cardiac ward, so why would you? But she had never been offered physiotherapy, nothing. So she went to the GP. They told her to just wear pads, and she was, in her 40s. And so she got to the stage where she became so depressed. She finished the relationship with her partner because every time they had sexual relations or intercourse, she was leaking urine, and she couldn't cope with the embarrassment. So that finished. She then ended up on antidepressants. I was living in the Middle East at the time and not seeing, everything that was going on. And so things had got really bad. She had eventually then agreed with the doctor to have the TVT, the transvaginal tape, which is sort of lifting up the bladder. And she was okay for, I would say, about 5 years. And then she got progressively incontinent again. And she became a shadow of her former self. And anybody who knows Carole, she was the life and soul of the party, first one in the party and last one to leave. Very, very vivacious. So to see somebody going from, 100 to 0, it just broke my heart. And she had then gone back to becoming depressed. She attempted to take her life at one stage, which was just sort of, I didn't know what to do, I didn't know where to go, and she had gone to a psychiatrist. So it had got that bad. And people were saying, yes, but it's only stress incontinence. This happens. It's your age. You're postmenopausal, yada, yada, yada. And she was saying, but I can't live like this. And I don't want to live like this. And so we were looking around to see what was available. And we were watching a program at home about, it was a urology doctor. And she was explaining what was happening to the male anatomy and everything, and she was really good. And then Mum said, do you know what, when I'm menstruating, I'm not leaking urine. And then it was that eureka moment where we both went, well, it's got to be pressure on the urethra. So we said, right, now what we're going to do is we're going to contact all the tampon companies. We're going to tell them, dip this tampon in latex, and we're going to solve the problem for millions of women out there. Yes, we did write to all the tampon companies. No, it didn't quite work out the way we were hoping. So what does two crazy women do together when they're in the kitchen? Let's make our own pessary. We didn't even know what a pessary was at that stage. We just made this sort of latex tampon. And the way that we'd started it is that at the time, my daughter was very young and I used to do a lot of arts and crafts with her. So we immersed this candle into air drying clay and a McDonald's straw, and then we had a keychain. So bear with me with this. So we put that in the clay, and that was our mould. So the candle represented what would have been the tampon. We then put silicone. So we were looking for anything that would solidify. So Mum had silicone that you pumped around the window seals, and she did that, let it dry. and then put a condom on it for hygiene reasons. And she wore it, and she said, it is the most comfortable thing I've ever worn. And because of both of us with nursing backgrounds, we knew that there was no way she was going to use a tampon instead of a pessary because of toxic shock syndrome, which is another 2-3 hour talk I can go on about. But so here we are, you know, Mum is there with this sort of homemade pessary, and then all of a sudden she started talking about it and didn't realise that the women in the village had the same problem. So they were queuing up at the door. Can you make us one? We were like in the kitchen, and I had all these little moulds going. We were trying to find out what's the best material. Anyway, long story short, we went to all these medical conferences to try to find out what is the best material. Best material, and still is silicone, because it's so inert. And Mum went then to her gynaecologist, and the gynaecologist said, my husband's the urogynaecologist lead of Singleton Hospital in Swansea. You should pose the question, you know, would this be a viable product? Anyway, he said yes. We went off and we had the product made, prototypes, in the UK. It went then through clinical trials. So we're fast forwarding quite a few years now. And then, unfortunately, just so the mum passed away suddenly in 2004, and the clinical trials were just about to be published just after that. So that left me devastated. I just did not know where to go, what to do. For the first 2 years, I was living in oblivion, you know, losing Mum. So I thought, right, I can either carry on looking down the bottle of a wine bottle, or get your act together and help as many women as possible. So that's what I did. I opened up a medical company in the UK in memory of my mother, and started on this journey which hasn't stopped. So that was in 2006. And so going forward then, I was contacting different pessary manufacturers to see if they would take the Incostress. That was the name of the pessary we designed and made. And they weren't interested. Oh, you know, it's, who are you, little person on your own? And everybody kept saying, don't go up against the big manufacturers. And I said, I'm not going up against them. I'm a complementary product to them. Just as a movement teacher is a complementary product to a physiotherapist, you know. And so anyway, I opened up a manufacturing company, made my own. It got launched into major retailers, and then Brexit happened, and the pandemic, and then I closed the company because it just wasn't viable. And I just thought, these women still need me, and they need the advice. And by that stage, I had gone in and got all the training from the major manufacturers about their pessaries, because during the time that I had the company, I'd become Europe's largest distributor for pessaries. I was selling everybody's pessary. And the more I learnt about it, the more intrigued I was about these different shapes and sizes, and why the UK hospitals weren't offering this amazing range to help women. And then I started doing a lot of focus groups and talking to women and finding out what their grievances were, what their problems were, and why were they given a certain type of pessary, going back to the doctor and them saying, this pessary is not working, it's falling out, and the doctor just shoving up the same pessary time and time again, you know, let's try a bigger one. It doesn't work like that with the human body. We need a different shape for different reasons, and so that got me sort of on the wagon then of how can I help as many women as possible. And not just about pessaries, it is about movement. It's no good just putting a pessary in situ and thinking that's it, that's the answer to my prayers, because it isn't. You need to move, you need to get that fascia moving, we need to get everything sort of helping each other within our body system, and body fluids and everything. So that was sort of where I sort of progressed. And when Brexit happened, I thought, I'm going to open up a training centre. That's it. I'm going to train as many medical professionals as possible and patients. So I'm kind of the bridge between the medical professions and the patients. So they're all armed with enough knowledge to help each other. And at the end of the day, it's the patient that comes first. So getting the right treatment for that patient is paramount in my book.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's an amazing story. I've heard the story, but shorter renditions. I had never heard of the kitchen with the silicone and the candle, and I just love that so much.
We had sort of molds, and I had a wooden spoon, and I had 2 cans of, I think it was baked beans at the side, just to suspend the spoon, to tie the string on, so it could be suspended in well, I had liquid latex. We were trying everything, to see what worked. But,
yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So we've introduced you obviously as sort of the pessary guru. We've said the word pessary a few times, but I think for there are still people that don't know what a pessary is. So can you describe what came to be as your version? There's lots of different types and styles of pessaries. You created one called the Incostress. What is a pessary?
Okay, so pessaries have been around since Cleopatra days. And, in the olden days, they were using iron rings, now, which you can imagine the weight of those rings. In certain countries, and they still are, they're using stones. They're using even potatoes. Don't go putting a potato in your vagina, ladies, please. In ancient Egypt, they would use pomegranates. And this is where the story of fertility from a pomegranate comes from. And it's got lots of antioxidants and everything. And again, please don't go shoving a pomegranate up your hoo-ha. So we've evolved a lot from these days, but a pessary basically is an internal prosthesis for any descending organs. So the organs can be the bladder, the bowel, the uterus, and of course the cervix comes down with the uterus. There's also then, as part of the bladder, we've got right at the top what's called an entrocele. So again, it's different sections of the bowel that can descend down. So a pessary is, a product, and it can be made out of many different, depending on where you are in the world. In the subcontinent, they use rubber, a lot of rubber. In Europe, we use PVC plastic and silicone, and in North America as well. Anything that basically is shaped to be able to support the internal organs from descending any further.
Mm-hmm. So Incostress originally was designed for your mother who was dealing with stress urinary incontinence. Are incontinence pessaries different than prolapse pessaries?
So a pessary is a pessary at the end of the day. It is a product that inserts into the vagina and supports whatever it needs to support. So with urinary stress incontinence, with this type of pessary, it's important to have the support that pushes against or compresses the urethra. So what we want with this pessary is frontal support. So we want to be able to lift up the bladder neck. We want to be able to support the urethra. So for this kind of shape, what you would probably look at is a ring with a knob, or anything with what's called a knob at the end. Rather an unfortunate name, but there you go. So I'm just going to get a couple of my little bits and pieces here right now. So what I've got in my hand is the Marland. So as you can see, the high back here, this would sit where the urethra is. So the urethra is that little tube that is about 3 centimeters long in females, and it allows urine from the bladder out of the body. So sometimes you end up with a urethra that's maybe a little bit hypermobile and will kink. So by inserting the pessary, we're going to be supporting the urethra and the bladder neck, and then lifting up those organs to their natural anatomical position where they should be.
And for those who are listening, this video, I'll post a link to the video that will be hosted on my YouTube channel so you can see what Gaynor is showing us as well.
Okay. There's this one called the euphemia, and again this sits just on the introitus, the entrance to the vagina, and then this then supports the urethra, and again it just snugly sits under the bladder. Now there is an important thing here, is that some pessaries, like the euphemia, is designed for stress incontinence only, and it doesn't have the strength to be able to support the descending organs. So the bladder, if the bladders come down, otherwise known as a cystocele, so anything cysto means bladder. So there's these pessaries that are designed only for stress incontinence, and then you have the prolapse pessaries that can be used for a prolapse and or stress incontinence. So I think that's quite important that your listeners really know the difference between what's what when they're going to search. Because if they go out, for instance, and let's say, so that the prolapses, they're graded by a physician or clinician. So a grade 1, you probably wouldn't even have any knowledge of it. You might just have a little bit of stress incontinence now and again, and it's where there's a very slight descent of any of the organs or all of the organs. Grade 2 is where the organs come down to the hymen, and you can see it at the introitus. And then grade 3 would be a little bit outside of the vagina, and then grade 4 comes all the way down. You don't have any more than a grade 4. So again, if you're looking at, let's say, supporting your urethra and you've got a grade 2 cystocele, then something that's designed for only stress incontinence, the bladder would simply just push that pessary out. So you've wasted your money running off and going to buy it. Because a lot of the pessaries for stress incontinence you can buy over the counter. So
right, I was going to just mention that. So there's Revive bladder support is one that I know that people can purchase on Amazon. The Poise Impressa is another one. So those ones are, now I have had clients who have used those for early stage prolapse and have found a little bit of relief. But mainly those would be designed for stress urinary incontinence. Correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So then you've mentioned the clinician is who, so we see, you know, a urogynecologist, sometimes a family doctor, an OB gynecologist who would diagnose and let us know what stage we're at, what type. So we could have 1, 2, 3, we can have multiple organs potentially that have prolapsed. And if they recommend a pessary, they are the ones who would help us. So not the over-the-counter ones, these are more the clinical ones. They are the ones that would help us to find the right shape and size. So you mentioned there's lots of shapes, there's lots of sizes. From my understanding, most of them will start with a ring pessary, typically not with a knob unless maybe it was indicated for that person. But a ring pessary is usually where they start. And what I have heard is that that's the one that helps kind of decide what shape or size may be the next step. Is that correct?
Yes. The reason that they fit a ring pessary is because, number one, it's easy to get in and out for the patient. So it's easy to teach as well, that the patient can self-manage. And statistically, from the evidence papers, is that if a patient can tolerate a ring pessary, she'd be able to tolerate any pessary. So that would be the first go-to, that first step. Now, there's many reasons why the ring may not stay in place, and that's probably where your clinician or physician would say, well, let's try this one, or let's try that one. And it really is a lottery when you're looking at pessaries. There's no good saying, patients come in on social media and you say, oh, well, my doctor tried, 3 types of rings and that's it. I'm not suitable. If you don't try other types, you don't know if you're suitable or not.
Yeah, I think, and I often tell people that it's a bit of a process. So sometimes you may find the right one right away. It could be life-changing, and that's amazing. But a lot of it can take 3, 4, sometimes 5 times, and people can lose faith during the process and maybe not get to the one that would be the best. So it does require a little bit of patience. And just as a sidebar, depending on the person's menopause status, so if they're sort of approaching menopause, I think vaginal estrogen is an important part. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And all the gynecologists that I've trained and spoken to, many actually use the estrogen to insert the pessary initially. A lot of women find a lot of relief once they start using estrogen. From experience of talking to my ladies, what tends to happen a lot with women is that they'll use the estrogen for a set amount of time, feel great, and then come off it. And then they feel like rubbish again, then they got to go back. So, my advice is if your doctor gives you, estrogen, it basically is for the rest of your life. And there's a lot of concern around about cancer and everything. So there's new evidence now showing that it does not cause, cancer. So I think the conversations really need to be had between the patient and the doctor, so the doctor can really explain in full and sort of alleviate any concerns that the patient may have around having estrogen. If you are on estrogen, my advice, and using a pessary, my advice is to use the estrogen at night so you get the full absorption there, and as you're lying down, so you haven't got any bits of estrogen trickling out through the vagina at all. And so, that would be my bit. But I'm certainly not an expert on estrogen, so I'm not going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, it is a bit of a rabbit hole, but I agree. All the practitioners, medical providers, all of the research points to zero link to cancer, zero link to heart disease of any kind. And we're talking local vaginal estrogen. So the estrogen that is placed in and around the vagina and stays in and around the vagina. So so that's a whole other conversation. I will have guests on here talking about hormones, but I think that was an important piece because some people with the insertion and removal of pessaries, especially if they are approaching or moving past menopause, the tissues without the integrity, that can then also prevent them from wanting to or potentially pursuing pessaries because the tissues are dry and irritated, and the thought of putting something in and taking something out is it causes distress to them.
Yeah, and I think it's important as well is that often, and certainly going back to when I first came out with Incostress, so this is the Incostress. When I first came out, one of the clients I'd sold it to had written to me saying, I took it out and I found blood on it. And I went straight back to Dr. Emery thinking, oh my God, have I killed this patient now? What am I going to do? She's got blood. We never experienced that on the clinical trial. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh, it's okay, and sort of calmed me down a bit and said, well, what's her age? And sort of, I got information from her, and indeed, she needed estrogen, which it was quite good that she found this out because she would never have gone and got the estrogen after, and she was great after that. She contacted me, and this is very typical of people who have atrophy, where the lining, basically the lining of the vagina become really, if it gets to a stage, like butterfly wings. So the minute you imagine putting a pessary in, taking it out, putting it in or even moving around, it can still cause little abrasions on the skin, and then that can cause bleeding. So if anybody does experience that, please go and see your physician or clinician and to discuss. And it might just be that you just need to plump up those tissues with estrogen.
So I'm going to move on to the different types. There's the ring that we've talked about, which is usually the starting point, and it is like, so it's like a very stretched out thin donut in a way. But then there is one called a donut that would be a lot thicker, a lot plumper, with a much tinier space on the inside. Yeah. And so again, those who are listening, the video will be able to demonstrate some of these. I'll also have links to images for the different types of pessaries as well. And so that what it would be the best one, let's start with the bladder. So what are typically, you've talked about the Marland and the ring, what would be most likely to be successful in somebody who has a bladder prolapse or cystocele?
So if they've had a ring and let's say that they're not happy with it because the ring just keeps slipping off, the doctor may say, okay, try a ring with a support membrane. So then that would give a little extra support for the bladder to rest on, or the bladder neck as well. There are some situations where the ring just keeps slipping down and sitting vertical. So when you put the ring in, so you fold it like a taco, and it goes into the posterior fornix, and then it sits on what's called the pubic symphysis. So just above your bikini line, where your pubic hair is, there's a hard bone, so that's your pubic bone. And so the pessary would sit sort of there on that bone. Now, sometimes we find that it slips down, and that's because of a couple of things. Number one, where you're supposed to put the ring right at the back wall in that fornix, sometimes the cervix is quite flush with that posterior fornix, and there's nothing to sit in. So it's like a little cul-de-sac. So ideally it would sit there, but sometimes if the cervix is here, there's nothing. So that can cause slippage. The other thing that can cause slippage is that the pubic bone itself might be very thin or very flat, so then it just slips off there. So, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with you if that happens. It's just the way that your body is formed, and it's like some people, they walk on the outside of their feet, supination, some people pronate. That's just your body pattern, so there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. All it means is that you go off and you find a pessary that suits your shape of body. So staying with, where am I? So if the ring doesn't suit you, then there's this one called the Schatz. And this offers some kind of suction. So for me, when I train medical staff, this is my next go-to. Let's see if this stays in place. So the cervix would sit here on the
kind of in the middle. Yeah.
And it goes in the same way as a ring pessary, but because of the suction, you've got a better chance of it staying in place.
So what makes that have suction on it?
So it's just the curve. It's just the shape of it. So the Schatz is the same as a Gellar Horn, but the Gellar Horn has got this little this stem.
It almost looks like a soother, like a baby soother.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, like a big giant one, but
yeah. So again, this sits down towards the entrance of the vagina, but again, coming up to what kind of people should have what kind of pessaries, it depends on your lifestyle. So if you're, let's say, an avid horse rider, the last thing you want to do is be riding and having that punching you in the rectum.
Having a little knob that is, yeah.
Yeah. So, but saying that, there are horse riders that actually love the Gellar Horn, so I'm not ruling it out for everybody. It's down to personal preference. But that would be, my next go-to if the ring doesn't suit.
And the Gellar Horn then, sorry, just to interrupt you, on the Gellar Horn, so it's the same top as the Schatz, it's round, it has the curvature which can create the suction, and then there's a little knob that comes down. What is the purpose of the knob?
Basically just for easier retrieval and for stability of the pessary as well. So where you have somebody with, let's say, a grade 3, so a greater prolapse, then the knob can actually create more stability for the pessary supporting the prolapse, whereas that may not give enough support. That may just move a little bit, and then you've got the prolapse then may descend underneath. So that a
bit of a sidebar. I'm moving on to Rectocele for a second, but Rectoceles can sometimes be a bit more challenging, but with that one, could that potentially help with the Rectocele because it's underneath, or could it actually make a Rectocele feel worse?
Well, this one, the
Gellar Horn, yes.
It's difficult to say, really. With Rectoceles, both you and I have both had a Rectocele, and it depends where the prolapse is on that
the length of the rectum wall. Yeah.
So sometimes what we find is that with ring pessaries, if somebody's got a Rectocele, it can actually stop them defecating, and especially if the Rectocele is what's called the pouch of Douglas, that part of the bowel, it will actually sit in and it'll just embed into the bowel. So having your bowels open is just a nightmare. With people with a ring. And the same kind of thing can happen with any of the circular pessaries as well. If you've got a Rectocele, I really would prefer one of the tubular ones, so it just sits nice on that. Or you could have one which is sort of more curved, so you've got the sieve. Let me just get that one. So as you can see, there's a nice curvature here, which basically cushions the posterior wall.
Right. So that looks like the Schatz in a way, with a bigger opening in the middle and a sort of a higher, this sounds weird, but for anybody who used a birth pool, it looks like a miniature birth pool without the middle part. But and what's the very first one that you held there that sort of looks like the Incostress? What's that one called?
So this is the T pessary type R, and this comes from Germany. So this comes in lots of different sizes. So again, this is why it's really important to have your clinician or physician measure you properly for having the right pessary. The smallest one, I think, is about like this. So this is one of the
are they different lengths and circumferences, or just lengths?
No, different lengths, different circumferences. So the type R has got these little ridges on. Me, from a personal point of view, using this with a Rectocele, this stayed in much better. The other one, the type B, which I don't have, is much smoother, but it's got like little dimples in. Now the dimples were created to represent the cube, the suction, but it doesn't give that much suction, to be honest. It's just like a silicone tampon. But yeah, I quite like the type R.
And how heavy are pessaries? Because sometimes looking at them, they look really big and like they could be really heavy. And so are they heavy? Are they like, could you say that there could be a strengthening component because they have a weight to them? So almost like a vaginal weight, it would impart a weight that we'd have to manage. Is that fair to say?
Well, this is part of the reason when I created the Incostress, it could be used as a vaginal toner as well. So, on average, 28 grams. So with 28 grams, I don't know what's that in Canadian money. Are you in grams over there? Or?
I can't think of the conversion either, but I'll put it in the notes.
Okay. So on average, about 28 grams is sort of an ideal weight for the vaginal cavity. And they don't go much heavier than that, to be honest. No, then they're quite light. And things like the Hodge. So if you've got somebody with, let's say, very small introitus, so this is an ideal pessary, so it just folds up. This lassos around the cervix, and then it would sit on the pubic bone, and then we're going back to, is this is suitable for stress incontinence, retroverted uterus, and a cystocele. So if you've got the one with the membrane, or they've got one with a knob on as well, this is great. This one, so many of the pessaries, over-the-counter pessaries, you'd have to take out daily. Things like the cubes, they should be taken out daily, but there is now new legislation with biotech. So this is a biotech cube. This can be used also for Rectocele. In fact, this is great for every single one of them. There is no pessary which is successful for an intracele, but as that intestine comes down, it will give a little bit of support. Yeah. So with the cubes, except for biotech, so all the other manufacturers state that the cube has to be removed daily because it really does create a lot of suction. And if you keep that in for any length of time, it can start to erode the vaginal walls and cause necrosis, and then you end up with all sorts of nasty little things going on. So, if there's any clinicians and physicians, because I've heard horror stories where doctors have said, yeah, you can leave it in for 3 months. This is absolutely not the case. Cubes removed daily. Biotech have said that they would be happy for somebody to leave it in for around 3 days and absolutely no longer than a week. So that's really important to know as well. Always follow the manufacturer's instructions.
And there are some that have a tail or sort of a string. Mm-hmm. It's often made of the same material, so silicone and what have you. And there are also some that don't. And you've talked about the word suction. Some have it, some don't. So when we think about, you've talked about insertion, where many of them fold up to some capacity, like the shape of a taco, or just the edge of it folds, and then it's inserted and put into place, essentially. So from a removal perspective, we'll talk first about the ones that don't have a string or a tail and do not have suction. How do you take that out safely?
Okay, so let me just go through all the different ones so your viewers get to see a good range of them. So this is a dish with a knob, so great for a cystocele, great for a uterine prolapse, and great for a rectocele as well. So this doesn't have any string, this would just sit. So all you would do is lubricate, and water-based only lubrication with any pessary. So you would just take your finger into, so this is the anterior part where your pubic notch is, and you're just literally just going to hook it and bring it down. And as you bring it down, then as it comes to the introitus, the entrance of the vagina, then you can start to fold it and bring it out of the vagina. So same thing with a ring or with an oval pessary as well. So it's sitting in the vagina. Again, just put your finger in. And there is a tool, if you don't like putting your finger in your own body, there is a pessary removal tool that was designed by a gynecologist in the States. So that's got like a little hook. It looks like a little crochet hook. So you can always put your hook up and then just bring that down as well.
And what's the name of the removal device?
Pessary removal tool.
Okay. All right. Keep it simple. But that brings up an interesting point too, and I don't mean to go off on another tangent, but there are some people who have fear or discomfort around putting their own fingers in their vagina. And there's no shame in that. There can be trauma because of that. There's for whatever reason. So I think that is such an important point to make, is that it doesn't have to be your finger if you don't want to. And there is a device that can help. So that's amazing.
Yeah. And just remember to lubricate it with water-based lubricant as well. And, you know, there are certain women that have trigger points, people with vaginismus and things like that. So where these patients, I would like to see them have treatment to relax the pelvic floor, to get that feeling of calmness, breathing exercises. So, you know, inhale for a less amount of time than you exhale, and use the nose. So we're working on the nitric oxide, and then that starts as a vasodilator. That then taps into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest. So all of these things can be managed as tools for the individual. When patients who have a fear already and they go to the doctor, and then the doctor's like, right, okay, let's get this in, without any explanation, that for me, you've lost your patient as soon as they've gone on the bed. So it's really important. And if you are a patient, you know, doctors are human. Talk to them, because they're not mind readers. You need to tell the doctor what your fear is. And sometimes it may need 2 or 3 visits to the doctor before you'll even consider going near you with a pessary. It might mean that, you know, you'll need to speak to a physiotherapist or somebody else that can explain everything before you're ready to accept a pessary. Because again, the brain talks to the pelvic floor, and the pelvic floor reacts to that. So if in your mind already it's like, that's not going to go near me, or that's going to fail before it happens, then for me, don't go there until you're ready mentally.
Right. Yeah. Are there other ones that we haven't talked about yet?
So we've got, we've got lots.
You've got a big tool bag. So let's, along your journey there, which ones would be best? We talked about bladder. Which ones would be best for uterine prolapse?
Basically anything that's going to support the posterior and the anterior fornix, to bring it up, so it will support then as well the cervix. So any of the dishes, what did we just have? The
Gellar Horn.
Gellar Horn. The club. So the club is kind of not so much used in North America, more used in Cyprus and Greece. And this is more for a severe prolapse, a uterine prolapse as well. And again, it basically acts the same as a Gellar Horn. So you just insert it. And these pessaries can stay in the body for up to 3 months. No more than 3 months, but up to 3 months. If you can self-manage and you can talk to your doctor and you say, you know what, I'm not really happy about having it in there for 3 months. Can you teach me how to take it out? Then absolutely, please do ask your doctor to teach you to self-manage. The pessaries that are occult or space-filling, such as the club, the Gellar Horn, the inflatable donut, the cube, these should not be used, or you shouldn't have penetrative sex while using these, because there's just only so much room in your vagina for something to go. So, and again, if you're a doctor or physiotherapist and you're talking to patients, you know, and ask them, are they sexually active? But one of the most important questions as well, because you can be sexually active and not have penetrative sex. So again, you need to be very specific to your clients, your patients, and say, are you having penetrative sex? Right. Yes, I am. Okay, so these pessaries are not for you. Let's have a look at what you can use while, you know, you're having intimacy.
So meaning that there are some that can be inserted and left in, even if there is some sort of insertion, fingers, penis, toys. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. The ring is one of them.
Yep. Yeah. So anything, I guess, the circular ones that have the space on the inside if there was a membrane there of any sort, or if it was more of the, as you said, the space occupying, those would not allow for that.
Yeah. And again, so talking about the ones with the membrane, I know that some patients actually can have managed to have intercourse, penetrative intercourse with this. Some women have a very long vagina, some have a very short one. So again, it depends where this is sitting on the body, just like some men have a shorter penis than others. So it depends on the dynamic of the couple there. So don't rule out anything until you've tried it. And if it doesn't work, well, just try something else.
And I guess if somebody has had a hysterectomy, that can sometimes shorten the vagina. So would that make a difference in terms of what pessaries may be successful for them if they had another type of prolapse they were dealing with?
Yeah, it's so first of all, if you have or are going to have a hysterectomy, my advice is always have physiotherapy prior and after the operation. In my day when I was nursing, vaginal dilators were given to patients who had hysterectomies. They were just handed out like sweets. They were taught how to use a vaginal dilator. Now nobody is taught how to use a vaginal dilator. So what can happen is that once a patient has had a hysterectomy, the top of the vagina basically glues together. And if you are not sort of stretching the scar tissue. I don't like to say breaking down because you're not breaking down scar tissue, but for
mobilizing it.
Yeah. So as you're mobilizing the scar tissue, then it keeps the vagina healthy and sort of open. Whereas if you're not, that scar tissue or the fascia then starts basically, the skin starts to knit together, the fascia then becomes dry, and there you end up with scar tissue anyway. And that, number one, many people find that intercourse, penetrative intercourse or using toys is extremely painful. Number two, they can't hold a pessary because there's just nothing there to be able to hold the pessary. So that, I think, is really important. If you have had a hysterectomy, then a cube is a very good one. Inflatable donut is another good one. The other donut is another good one. Some people say that they have success with ring pessaries. So again, it is trial and error. But sort of the occult ones, if you have had a hysterectomy, they're probably your go-to pessary.
And you mentioned earlier that biotech for the cube has said potentially, no more than a week, 3 days would be kind of ideal. And then there are other ones that need to be taken out and put back in every single day.
Yeah.
What determines which ones can stay in for up to 3 months or no longer than a week or have to be taken in and out every day?
So this comes down to efficacy. It comes down to the individual manufacturers. Now we're going into sort of the legality side of things. So every year you get audited by your notified body. And it all comes under the scope where the medical directive will determine. So you've got a pessary, let's say, that is a class 2A. So that means that pessary can stay in the body uninterrupted for up to 30 days. My Incostress was a class 2A, but as the manufacturer, I did not want people to leave that in for that long length of time. I wanted them to have that sort of engagement with their own pelvic floor, to be working the pelvic floor. And so I said that it had to come out daily. So it really depends on what the reason behind the manufacturer is. There isn't a blanket rule, but they all do follow the medical directive. A class 2B, then it goes under risk analysis. So the higher the certification is, the more risk to the body it is. So a class 2B can be left in for up to 3 months. And again, you know, my sort of outlook on this is that, yes, it can be left in for 3 months, but if you want to be able to take it in and out of a week or so, then that should be your prerogative as well. So, you know, there's no hard and fast rules. We're just taking it right up to the limit of patient safety. So that's basically what determines the length.
Are there any that have to be inserted and removed by a doctor, or could they all technically be self-managed?
Again, following the manufacturer's information for use leaflets, so you stay within the guidelines. So the things with that state that the doctor removes it and inserts it and removes it, the Gellar Horn is one of them. The donut, only because they can be very cumbersome to remove. So with the donut, and again, we've got patients that self-manage them. So again, it really, you need that conversation with your doctor. But if your doctor says, no, I'm sticking with what the manufacturer says, then he has the absolute right to advise you accordingly. If you have any problems with your pessary, like you've got a green or yellow discharge, having a clear discharge is absolutely normal, because when you're shifting up organs, the hormones are shifting as well, and that can cause extra lubrication of the body. So you're going to have that extra sort of watery discharge, perfectly normal. If it becomes smelly, foul smelling, thick, yellow, green, you must contact your doctor. Get that pessary out immediately. That means there's an infection going on there, and it should not stay there. So what was the question?
I know, I do that too. The question was just, are there any that have to be inserted or removed by a practitioner?
Yeah, so I would say these, and the Hodge as well. And they're really quite fiddly to get in and out. The other ones...
Yeah, the other ones, like most of them look like, okay, I think I could do that. The Hodge one, though, when I look at the Hodge, I think I'm not even really sure how to manage that one.
Yeah, I tried to insert this and get it out myself, and it took me quite a while.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about the Hodge is that, okay, it stays in for 3 months. If you're pregnant, it can stay in. If you're having intercourse, it can stay in. It's one of those lovely ones. You don't feel it. This one is quite light. The only thing I would say is that anything with a metal, so it has metal inside, as with the Gurung, and I'll talk about the Gurung in a minute. Anything with metal inside, if you're going for an MRI or any scans of anything, they have to come out first, because it'll block the scanning. So with the Gurung, you're talking about what's good for a cystocele. This is great for a cystocele, and coupled with a uterine prolapse as well. So this sits on the anterior. So if this is my anterior wall, the bladder would sit here. It would support the urethra. And what I love about this, but again, it's one of those fiddly ones that it is like, I can't get it in. Even doctors have trouble getting it in. So you basically get it in. You slide it in like this, open it up. And then these are called feet, and you just tip one of the feet down. So it, while I'm just thinking about this, anybody who is self-managing or putting pessaries in, please always push up your prolapse, or if you can, ideally lie down for 20 minutes with your legs up against the wall. Allow that prolapse to go back. Have an empty bladder. Push the prolapse up and then insert your pessary. You're going to find it'll stay in much better than trying to fight with your prolapse and all sorts while your sort of gravity is pulling everything down. So
right. Yeah. One thing that it was just sort of in one of my other episodes with Dr. Sarah, she's the women's bladder doctor. Once we finished our call and we were just sort of saying goodbye and chitty-chatting after, she said, you know, it makes you think sometimes maybe we should all be wearing a pessary for prevention. And I've absolutely had that thought. And when I look at something like the T pessary that you held up, or even the Incostress, something that is space occupying for the length, like the length, not, again, there are different lengths of vaginas, but if you could imagine the length of the vagina, so to speak, like a tampon size. What do you think about that? Do you think that there could be a role of prevention?
There's no clinical evidence to date to support that. My my ick, if that's a word even, or I've just made up a word.
It is
my
now.
Ick with that is that I feel women, if they have this support mechanism in their body all the time, they're going to get lazy, for want of a better word, and they're not going to do any exercises at all. And I don't want people to get lazy in their own body. And I don't want them to depend on having, a pessary forever and a day. I think what I'm trying to do is to encourage my women, yes, if you're going running or if you're swimming or whatever you want to do, skiing, use a pessary for support there. But as a preventative measure, we shouldn't even, in my opinion, we shouldn't even be going down this route of thinking, let's have, a pessary or a prosthetic as a preventative. Let's increase the inner tone of our body ourselves so we are able to support our own organs. Now, there will be people, let's say, with EDS and, hypermobility, which have a lot of things going on in their own body. Maybe that demographic could be potential clients for sort of maybe a trial or whatever to see if it would prevent it. But to have the whole world using a pessary as a preventative measure, I don't see it as a good, but that's just my take on it.
Yeah, it's. I don't think that everybody should have one in all the time. I do think that there can be a role, and I'm speaking about this from my own personal body and also that of people that I've worked with as well. There is in my case, having had prolapse, there is a bit of a PTSD component where you've had it, you've been able to overcome it, you don't ever want to experience that again. So I take all the steps I possibly can, one of which I do where I put the poise and pressa in when I'm doing heavy resistance training. And it provides me with confidence that I have a little bit of extra support in there. And it also can be a feedback tool for some, because if you have something inserted and you are exerting a force, if you feel the shifts of different pressures in your body, and it can provide what was my recruitment strategy there? What was my breathing like when I did that? What was this? What if I changed something? So I think that there can be a bit of a feedback benefit there as well. But that's just me. And a few people I've worked with follow that same principle. Some have used the IncoLite. Some have used the poise and pressa. Some of them just wear a tampon. And the tampon, we have to be careful that it's not for long periods of time because of the toxic shock. And also, especially as we're moving towards and after menopause, that absorption, we don't need something else that's pulling out more of our lubrication and our juiciness, right? Like, it can be really difficult to pull something out when we're dry, and if there's no, they're meant for menstrual blood, and if there isn't any of that, it can be a bit uncomfortable. So,
because when I go for a walk with the dog, I use my IncoLite. I absolutely support the idea of, if you are doing exercises, certainly if you've experienced prolapse, and I'm on the same track as you as well, Kim, because I never want to go through that again. And we did a couple of exercises the other day with my ladies, and I was doing wide leg circles on my left. I was lying on my right side, doing it on the left side, and then I was pulsing, and I thought, I can't contract. I'm not feeling any contraction here. And I did it on the other side, and I thought, yeah, I can contract here. And it was a weird feeling, and I thought, uh-oh. So, yeah, I definitely would support the idea of women, especially postmenopausal, and if you've, postpartum as well, wearing a pessary for that support mechanism to be able to, and like with feedback, you need feedback as well.
Right.
But
Right.
That's one of the sponges. So this is a menstrual sponge, a Beppe sponge. So they've got the pink ones, but unfortunately they're not making them anymore. This is a dry one. They come with the wet ones. They're sterile in sterile packs. But anybody who is having difficulty keeping in a pessary or just doesn't get along with a pessary, there's always the sponge and the natural sea sponges as well. That can be used. So, and these will form the shape of the body quite nicely as well.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to my last question, which is there's a few companies that I know of who are I believe they're already in clinical trials, and the release, it'll be like an anatomically custom designed pessary specific to your anatomy based on ultrasound and 3D. Basically, it'll be a 3D printed pessary based on your ultrasound or your imaging, which I think sounds really amazing. And when you held up that sea sponge and how it can conform to all the little intricacies of our own individual anatomy, because we all do have slight different variations, and the assortment of pessaries is amazing. And we do have a ton of variety there. And there are a lot of people whose lives are changed by pessaries. There are also some that just have some slight differences. Avulsions, I can think of, are another kind of category of individuals who may have challenges with some pessaries. So I think it's kind of exciting, the innovation that's happening in this space.
Yeah, as long as the material is right, because if they're going to have a solid material and it's made to your specific anatomy, and let's say it's so silicone is measured in shores. So the higher the shore, so let's say this is, I don't know, probably a 40 shore, so it's quite flat, or 30, maybe less. This would be practically a 50 or 60 shore.
So how rigid or pliable they are.
Yeah. So and I think it's a great idea, and I hope the clinical trials just, nail it. What I would like to ask the questions is, we're moving all the time. During certain times of the day, some people might need a larger pessary than what they needed in the morning. Round about menstrual time, with the cervix that lowers, may need a different shape. So how are they going to combat that? Because we are changing throughout the day. Yeah,
that's such a good point. Such a good point. Yeah, and that we change through the day, we change through weeks, months, years. Yeah. There's sort of a constant evolution. So even if one pessary is working now, if it stops, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It's just there's been an evolution and it's time for something new.
And if they've done, let's say, your program, and at the end of 12 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if they'll come to you and say, hey, Kim, I was a size 76 ring and I've done your program now, and this ring really is uncomfortable. I might need to go down a size. And that's a good thing for me, because it means that the prolapse is now retracting back at the pelvic floor, is
has
engaging
more resilience.
So don't, your listeners, if you are in Kim's program and you find that your pessary doesn't work for you after 12 weeks, that's a plus for me. It means go back to your doctor and get measured again, and hopefully.
And there are some people who think of a pessary as a crutch, and they think that, they're failing. I shouldn't use this. It's going to weaken my pelvic floor. And I argue the opposite. I think sometimes it can, first of all, take away symptoms that interfere with your desire and your potential for exercise. It could also potentially change the way the pelvic floor muscles are reacting, because they're now no longer managing a bit of an odd displaced load, so to speak. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think a good friend of mine, who's also a fitness instructor, Louise Field, and I got to give her credit for this. I wish I'd thought of it, but a pessary is like an internal sports bra. Yeah. I love it, and it's just that. I think as long as you don't rely on it for everything and start to sort of realize that, we're saying, you maybe have been told your pelvic floor muscles are weak. Well, what does that mean? You know, within our fascia, the fascia needs to be moving all the time. So a weak pelvic floor, for me, it means the body patterns have changed and they need to be refocused, put on course again. It doesn't mean that they're weak, it just means that there's a shift in your body pattern. And a pessary can certainly help with feedback. It can help with, while you're exercising, give you that extra support to get on with the exercises, to be able to sort of do whatever you need. So yeah, I think it's certainly a tool that shouldn't be discarded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great way to end, with that philosophy of our systems and how we can support all those ebbs and flows and the movement that we need. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Always love chatting with you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you.